What happens when a respected criminal justice professor is pulled over for driving while black? Dr. Marcus Wilson was simply driving to his first day as Police Academy Director when Officer Jason Reed decided to make an example of him. But Reed didn't know who he was messing with. As the confrontation escalates from harassment to assault, witnesses capture everything on video. Now a decorated officer's career hangs in the balance as his history of racial profiling comes to light. One traffic stop exposes years of systemic abuse and cover-ups within the department. Will this become the catalyst for real change in policing? Follow Dr. Wilson's journey from victim to reformer as he transforms a personal injustice into institutional accountability. Racist police officer stops black professor, a powerful story about dignity, justice, and the long road to reform. Do you think Officer Reed deserved to lose his badge? Comment below with your thoughts on police accountability, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice prevailing against all odds. Dr. Marcus Wilson adjusted his tie in the rearview mirror of his 3-year-old Lexus. At 52, he carried himself with the quiet confidence that came from decades of academic achievement and respect in his field. The morning sun glinted off his closely cropped salt and pepper hair as he prepared for his first day as director of the State Police Academy. "You've got this, honey," his wife Diane had told him earlier that morning, straightening his collar before he left their modest suburban home. 20 years of teaching criminal justice has more than prepared you." Marcus smiled at the memory as he checked his watch. 7 a.m., perfect timing. He was methodical about punctuality, just as he was about everything in his life. His daughter Zoe had called last night from her sophomore year at Georgetown, excited about her father's new position. "Dad, this is exactly what you've been working toward," she had said. "Now you can actually implement all those police reform ideas you've been writing about for years." The weight of that responsibility wasn't lost on Marcus. As one of the few black criminologists to rise to such a position in the state, he understood the opportunity and scrutiny that awaited him. His doctoral dissertation on bias in policing had become required reading at several academies nationwide. Now he would have the chance to put theory into practice. Marcus checked his navigation app as he turned onto Oakwood Avenue. The academy was located on the outskirts of the city, a sprawling campus where the state trained all its law enforcement officers. His appointment had made small headlines in academic circles, but hadn't yet been broadly announced to the police force. A strategic decision by the police commissioner who wanted Marcus to assess operations without preconceptions coloring interactions. Traffic was light this Monday morning as Marcus rehearsed his opening address in his mind. He'd spent the weekend refining his vision, evidence-based training methods, enhanced de-escalation protocols, and comprehensive anti-bias curriculum. His appointment had come amid growing calls for police reform, and Marcus viewed it as both an opportunity and a responsibility. The dashboard clock read 7:15 a.m. as he navigated through a quiet residential area. His phone buzzed with a text from Deputy Director James Collins, who would be meeting him at the front entrance. Marcus had worked with James on several community policing initiatives over the years and was glad to have a familiar face in the administration. As he approached an intersection, Marcus noticed a patrol car parked on the side street. Nothing unusual, this was a safe, middle-class neighborhood where police presence was common and generally welcomed. Marcus stopped fully at the stop sign, used his turn signal, and proceeded at exactly the speed limit. In his briefcase sat the files he'd meticulously prepared: curriculum proposals, training schedules, and assessment protocols. After years of critiquing police practices from his university office, he would now have the authority to implement meaningful changes. The thought both excited and humbled him. Marcus glanced at the framed photo he'd placed on the passenger seat, a picture of his father in his Army uniform. Jackson Wilson had instilled in his son a deep respect for public service and education. "Excellence is your armor," his father used to say. Those words had guided Marcus through graduate school, his professorship at the state university, and now to this pivotal role. The academy came into view, a cluster of red brick buildings surrounded by training grounds and obstacle courses. Marcus felt a surge of purpose. Here was where officers learned to serve and protect, where habits and attitudes that would shape careers were formed, and he was now responsible for that formation. His cell phone rang through the car speakers, the commissioner checking to ensure he was on schedule for their 8 a.m. meeting. Marcus confirmed his arrival time, his deep voice projecting the calm authority that had made him a favorite professor among students. As he approached the final turn toward the academy, Marcus noticed the patrol car from earlier had pulled out and appeared to be following him. He checked his speedometer, 62 in a 65 zone. His registration and insurance were current, his driving record spotless. The patrol car's lights suddenly flashed on. Marcus felt a familiar tightening in his chest. the instinctive tension that came whenever he saw those lights, regardless of his impeccable record. He signaled and pulled over properly, reaching for his wallet while keeping his hands visible. The day was about to take an unexpected turn. Marcus pulled his car completely off the road and placed both hands on the steering wheel at the 10 and 2 positions, a practice he'd always followed and taught to his students. Through his rearview mirror, he observed the officer taking his time, remaining in the patrol car for nearly 3 minutes before finally emerging. Officer Jason Reed approached the vehicle with his hand resting on his holstered weapon, an unnecessary precaution that didn't escape Marcus's notice. At 34, Reed had a stocky build and carried himself with an exaggerated swagger that projected authority rather than earned it. License, registration, and insurance, Reed demanded without preamble or explanation for the stop. "Good morning, officer," Marcus replied evenly. "May I ask why I'm being stopped?" "License, registration, and insurance first," Reed repeated, his tone hardening. "Then we'll get to that." "Of course," Marcus said, maintaining his composure. "I'm going to reach for my wallet in my inside jacket pocket, and my documents are in the glove compartment." Reed gave a curt nod, watching with narrowed eyes as Marcus retrieved his license and then carefully opened the glove compartment for the other documents. As Marcus handed everything over, he noticed Reed's eyes widen slightly at the address on his license, an upper-middle-class neighborhood predominantly populated by white professionals. "This your car?" Reed asked, studying the registration. "Yes, it is," Marcus answered simply. "How long have you had it?" "About 3 years now." Reed walked back to his patrol car, leaving Marcus waiting. Through his side mirror, Marcus could see Reed speaking into his radio. Across the street, a small coffee shop was opening for the day. 2 customers standing outside had noticed the stop and were watching with interest, one discreetly holding up a phone. After 5 minutes, Reed returned, still holding Marcus's documents. "Where are you headed this morning, Mr. Wilson?" Reed asked, deliberately omitting Marcus's title despite it being clearly printed on his license. "To the State Police Academy. I have a meeting at 8 a.m., Marcus replied, Reed's eyebrows raised. "And what's your business there?" "I'm starting a new position today." "As what, janitor?" Reed smirked, clearly amused by his own joke. Marcus took a slow, measured breath. "I'm the new academy director." Reed's laugh was immediate and dismissive. "Right, and I'm the governor. No, seriously, what are you doing there?" "I am the new academy director," Marcus repeated calmly. "You can verify that with Commissioner Hayes if necessary." Reed's expression hardened. "Step out of the vehicle, please." "May I ask why?" "I haven't violated any traffic laws." "Sir, when an officer asks you to exit the vehicle, you exit the vehicle. That's the law." Reed's hand moved back to his holster. "Now step out slowly." Marcus weighed his options quickly. As an expert in police procedure, he knew his rights, but he also knew the potential danger of the situation. "Officer Reed," he said, reading the nameplate, "I'm respectfully asking for the reason for this stop and request." "You were weaving in your lane," Reed claimed, though both men knew it was fabricated. "And now I smell something suspicious coming from the vehicle." It was a transparent pretext, but Marcus recognized the escalation pattern. He carefully unbuckled his seatbelt and opened the door, keeping his movements deliberate and slow. "Hands where I can see them," Reed instructed unnecessarily, as Marcus already had his hands visible. The coffee shop had gotten busier, with several more patrons now openly recording the interaction on their phones. A barista had stepped outside, concern evident on her face. "Officer, there are witnesses recording this interaction," Marcus noted calmly. "I believe it would be in everyone's best interest if you clarified the actual reason for this stop." Reed's face flushed. "You think having an audience changes anything? Put your hands on the hood of your car." Marcus complied, careful to make no sudden movements. "I'd like to inform you that I'm recording this interaction as well," he said, nodding toward his phone in the cup holder which he had activated to record when he first pulled over, another practice he taught his students. Reed's expression darkened. He reached into the car and grabbed Marcus's phone. "Evidence," he muttered, pocketing it. "That's my personal property," Marcus stated firmly. "You have no legal right to confiscate it without a warrant." Questioning my authority, Reed stepped closer, invading Marcus's personal space. "That fancy car and address don't mean you can talk down to an officer." Across the street, the crowd had grown. A woman in business attire approached halfway. "Is everything all right over there?" she called out. "Stay back, ma'am, police business," Reed barked without turning. Marcus remained steady. "Officer Reed, I have a constitutional meeting to attend, and you have provided no legitimate reason for this detention. I'm respectfully asking to be on my way." Reed leaned in closer. "Listen," he said, voice low but intense, "people like you need to understand how things work around here. That car, that suit doesn't change who you are or who I am. We clear." "Crystal clear," Marcus replied, his gaze unwavering. "And your badge number is 8734. I'll be remembering that." The situation stood on a knife's edge. Reed seemed to realize the growing audience and reluctantly stepped back. "I'm going to let you off with a warning this time," he announced loudly for the benefit of the onlookers. "Watch your driving." "My phone, please," Marcus requested, extending his hand. Reed hesitated, then tossed the phone onto the hood of the car with enough force to crack the screen. "Have a nice day, sir," he said with exaggerated politeness. As Marcus collected his damaged phone, he looked directly at Reed. "I certainly will, officer. I suspect we'll be seeing each other again very soon." Marcus carefully retrieved his cracked phone from the hood of his car, examining the damage while maintaining a composed expression. The screen now displayed a spiderweb of cracks, but it was still functioning and, importantly, still recording. He placed it back in the cup holder without ending the recording. "I need to see your license and registration again," Officer Reed demanded, his tone sharper than before. "You haven't returned them to me yet, officer," Marcus replied evenly. Reed patted his pockets with exaggerated movements. "Right, here they are." He held the documents just out of Marcus's reach, then deliberately dropped them on the ground between them. Oops. The small crowd across the street had grown to about a dozen people. Several had their phones raised, capturing the increasingly tense encounter. A city bus had stopped nearby, and passengers were watching through the windows with concerned expressions. "Officer Reed," Marcus said, not moving to pick up his documents, "I believe we're done here. You verified my information and found no violations. I'd like to continue to my appointment." Reed stepped closer, his body language aggressive. "You'll leave when I say you can leave. Now pick up your documents." "I respectfully decline to be baited into a compromising position," Marcus replied. "If you're finished with your traffic stop, please return my documents properly." Reed's face flushed red. "You think you're smarter than me, don't you?" He kicked the documents further under the car. "Looks like they blew away. Maybe you should get down there and look for them." A woman stepped forward from the growing crowd. "I've called 911 to request a supervisor," she announced loudly, "and I've been recording everything." Reed spun toward her. "Stay back, this is a police matter." Using this momentary distraction, Marcus carefully retrieved his phone and pressed a few buttons, sending the recording to his cloud storage and to his wife, a safety protocol he developed years ago. Reed turned back, noticing the movement. "What are you doing? Give me that phone." He lunged forward, grabbing Marcus's wrist with excessive force. "Officer, you're hurting me," Marcus stated clearly, making sure his words were captured by both his phone and the bystanders' recordings. "Stop resisting." Reed shouted, though Marcus had been completely compliant. "I am not resisting," Marcus responded calmly but firmly. "I am standing still with my hands visible. You are escalating the situation unnecessarily." Reed twisted Marcus's arm, forcing him against the car. "I said stop resisting," the crowd reacted with gasps and shouts. "He's not doing anything," someone called out. In the struggle, Reed knocked Marcus's phone to the ground and deliberately stepped on it, crushing it further. Then in a swift motion, he pushed Marcus hard against the vehicle, causing his head to connect with the doorframe. "That's assault," a voice from the crowd shouted. Blood trickled from a small cut on Marcus's forehead, but he remained measured in his response. "Officer Reed, badge number 8734, you've just committed assault and destroyed my property. This is being witnessed and recorded by at least 10 citizens." Reed seemed to suddenly realize the precariousness of his position. Looking around at the crowd of witnesses, he took a half step back. "You struck your head while resisting," he claimed loudly. "The videos will show otherwise," Marcus responded, carefully touching his forehead and noting the blood on his fingertips. The wail of approaching sirens caught everyone's attention. Reed's expression shifted from anger to calculation. "We have a situation here," Reed called to the crowd, attempting to control the narrative. "This individual was uncooperative during a routine traffic stop." A woman stepped forward, holding her phone. "I have the entire interaction recorded from the moment you approached his car. He hasn't been uncooperative once." Reed's radio crackled. "Unit 47, what's your status? We're receiving multiple civilian calls about your location." Before Reed could respond, 2 additional patrol cars pulled up. A sergeant stepped out of the first vehicle, taking in the scene with practiced efficiency. "Sergeant Williams," Marcus acknowledged, recognizing the officer from a community policing workshop he had led the previous year. The sergeant's eyes widened in recognition. "Dr. Wilson, what's happening here?" Reed's posture stiffened. "You know this guy?" "Of course I do," Williams responded. "He's Dr. Marcus Wilson, the new Academy director, and one of the most respected criminal justice professors in the state." Reed's face drained of color as the reality of his situation began to sink in. "I believe," Marcus said calmly, gesturing to his damaged phone and the crowd of witnesses, "we have some matters to discuss at the station." Sergeant Williams escorted Marcus and Officer Reed to the station in separate vehicles. The police headquarters buzzed with activity as they arrived, word having already spread about the incident. Marcus sat in a small conference room, holding a paper towel to his forehead while a paramedic examined the cut. It's superficial, Dr. Wilson, the paramedic concluded, but you should still watch for signs of concussion over the next 24 hours. Thank you, Marcus replied, accepting the bandage offered to him. Sergeant Williams returned with a cup of coffee. The chief wants to speak with you as soon as possible, he said, placing the coffee before Marcus. But first, we need your formal statement. Of course, Marcus agreed. He reached for his damaged phone. Much of what happened is recorded here, though the screen is severely damaged. Williams nodded. Our tech team can retrieve the data. We've also collected video evidence from several witnesses. The door opened and a desk sergeant entered, an older man with a weathered face and suspicious eyes. I'll take Dr. Wilson's statement, he announced rather than offered. Sergeant Miller, I can handle this, Williams began. The chief asked me specifically, Miller countered, his tone leaving no room for argument. Williams reluctantly left as Miller sat down across from Marcus, placing a statement form between them. So, Dr. Wilson, he began, his voice carrying a subtle edge, tell me why you were driving near Officer Reed's patrol area this morning. Marcus recognized the framing immediately. I was driving to the police academy for my first day as director. Officer Reed pulled me over without cause. Miller's pen remained motionless. Without cause, that's a serious accusation against a decorated officer. It's an accurate one, Marcus responded evenly, and I believe the evidence will confirm it. Miller leaned back. Officer Reed states you were weaving in your lane and became combative when questioned. That's false, Marcus stated firmly. The videos will show I remained composed throughout while Officer Reed escalated the situation unnecessarily. Miller's expression hardened. Look, Dr. Wilson, we all know how these things can be misinterpreted. Perhaps we can handle this internally, a simple misunderstanding between professionals. A misunderstanding, Marcus gestured to his forehead. Officer Reed physically assaulted me and destroyed my property after stopping me without cause. Strong words, Miller muttered. Reed's been on the force for 12 years, never had complaints stick before. Stick, Marcus echoed. So there have been complaints. Miller shifted uncomfortably. Every officer gets complaints, part of the job. The door opened again and a woman in a tailored suit entered. I'll take it from here, Sergeant Miller, she announced. Miller stood abruptly. Captain, I was just getting Dr. Wilson's statement. And now I'll finish it, she replied firmly. The chief asked me to handle this personally. After Miller left, the woman extended her hand. Captain Sarah Miller, Internal Affairs. No relation to that Miller, thankfully. Marcus shook her hand. Dr. Marcus Wilson. I know who you are, Dr. Wilson. Your research on implicit bias in policing has been on my reading list for years. She sat down, opening a fresh notebook. Now let's start from the beginning. Over the next 30 minutes, Marcus provided a detailed account of the morning's events. Captain Miller took meticulous notes, asking clarifying questions without judgment or skepticism. Dr. Wilson, this wasn't Officer Reed's first problematic encounter, she revealed after he finished. There have been 7 formal complaints against him in the past 3 years, all from people of color, all dismissed by his superiors. Including Sergeant Miller, Marcus asked. Especially Sergeant Miller, she confirmed. They're cousins by marriage, Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Institutional protection. Exactly what your research predicted, Captain Miller agreed. But this time is different. Multiple witnesses, video evidence, and the victim isn't easily dismissed, Marcus concluded. Precisely, she closed her notebook. The media's already caught wind of this. 2 local stations are outside requesting statements. Before Marcus could respond, his phone rang, his wife calling on the temporary phone Sergeant Williams had provided. Deanne, he answered, I'm okay. It's all over social media, Marcus, she said, her voice tight with concern. Someone posted the video. It has thousands of shares already. Captain Miller watched as Marcus processed this information. Commissioner Hayes is on his way, she informed him after he ended the call. This incident is quickly becoming very public. Good, Marcus said with quiet determination. Transparency is essential for accountability. Captain Miller nodded in agreement. Officer Reed is claiming you provoked him. The videos will show otherwise. They already have, she confirmed. I've reviewed 3 different angles. His narrative is falling apart by the minute. A knock at the door announced Commissioner Hayes' arrival. The tall, distinguished man entered with a grim expression. Dr. Wilson, he said, extending his hand, this is not how I imagined welcoming you to your new position. Nor I, Commissioner, Marcus replied. Hayes straightened his tie. Captain Miller will ensure a thorough investigation. In the meantime, how would you like to proceed with your new role? Marcus considered the question carefully. With even greater purpose, Commissioner, today's incident only confirms the urgency of the work we need to do. By afternoon, the incident had transformed from a local police matter into a viral news story. Marcus sat in his office at the police academy. He had insisted on beginning his duties despite the morning's events, reviewing the mounting evidence with Captain Miller. We've collected statements from 14 witnesses, Captain Miller reported, arranging documents methodically on Marcus's desk. All corroborate your account, Marcus nodded, studying the forensic analysis of his damaged phone. The timestamp data confirms the sequence of events precisely as I stated. There's more, Captain Miller continued, sliding forward a folder marked confidential. Since the video went viral, we've received 7 new complaints against Officer Reed. All from minority drivers, all reporting similar patterns of behavior. Marcus opened the folder, scanning the testimonials with practiced efficiency. These date back 3 years. Why weren't they flagged in your system? They were, Captain Miller admitted, her expression hardening, but they never made it past preliminary review. Sergeant Miller classified them as unfounded before they reached my office. Marcus studied the complaint pattern on the spreadsheet Captain Miller had prepared. The geographic clustering is telling, all within a 5-mile radius of upper-middle-class minority neighborhoods. Precisely, Captain Miller agreed. Reed specifically targets well-dressed minorities driving luxury vehicles in predominantly white areas. The office phone rang, Commissioner Hayes calling for an update. Marcus activated the speakerphone. The situation has escalated, Dr. Wilson, Hayes began without preamble. The mayor's office is receiving calls, and the NAACP has issued a statement demanding immediate action against Officer Reed. Understandable, Marcus replied. Captain Miller has uncovered a pattern of similar incidents. We've also identified procedural failures in complaint processing, Captain Miller added. Sergeant Miller appears to have systematically buried complaints against his cousin. A heavy sigh came through the speaker. Dr. Wilson, how do you want to proceed? This is already becoming a public relations crisis. Marcus considered the question carefully. With transparency and due process, Commissioner, this presents an opportunity to demonstrate our commitment to accountability. I agree, Hayes responded. Captain Miller, prepare a comprehensive report by tomorrow morning. Dr. Wilson, the press is requesting a statement. I'll handle it, Marcus assured him, but first I want to review these prior complaints thoroughly. After the call ended, Marcus's temporary phone buzzed with a text from Diane. CNN just picked up the story. You okay? Captain Miller noticed his expression. Your family must be concerned. They are, Marcus acknowledged, but they understand the importance of seeing this through properly. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Deputy Director James Collins entered, carrying a laptop. Dr. Wilson, you need to see this. He placed the computer on the desk, displaying a private police forum where several officers were discussing the incident. The comments ranged from supportive to disturbing. This is concerning, Marcus noted, reading a particularly threatening message from a user with the handle Thin Blue Line 45. This officer is actively encouraging others to tamper with evidence. Captain Miller leaned forward. That username belongs to Officer Daniels, Reed's former partner. Document everything, Marcus instructed. This demonstrates the cultural issues we need to address. The office phone rang again, a reporter from the Washington Post requesting comment. Marcus declined, focusing instead on the evidence before him. There's something else, Captain Miller said, pulling out another file. Reed's traffic stop data. Over the past 2 years, 83% of his discretionary stops involved minority drivers, despite this jurisdiction being only 24% minority. Marcus wasn't surprised. Statistical evidence of targeting. This aligns perfectly with the pattern analysis in my 2022 paper. Another knock at the door revealed Sergeant Williams. Dr. Wilson, Officer Reed is demanding to speak with his union representative before further questioning. That's his right, Marcus acknowledged. Ensure all protocols are followed precisely. After Sergeant Williams departed, Captain Miller checked her watch. The disciplinary board can convene tomorrow at 9 a.m. Will you attend? Absolutely, Marcus confirmed. But first, I need to address the Academy cadets this afternoon. This incident provides a powerful teaching opportunity. Marcus stood, straightening his tie and adjusting his bandage. Captain, please compile all evidence for presentation to the board. I want complete transparency in this process. Of course, she agreed. What will you tell the cadets? Marcus gazed thoughtfully through his office window at the training grounds where future officers practiced. The truth, that the badge is a symbol of public trust, not personal power, and that today we witnessed what happens when that distinction is forgotten. The police headquarters conference room had been transformed into a makeshift hearing chamber. Long tables formed a U-shape at the front, where 7 senior officers from various precincts, the disciplinary board, took their seats. Captain Miller had arranged the room meticulously, ensuring the audiovisual equipment was properly tested and functional. Marcus entered at precisely 8:55 a.m., dressed in a perfectly pressed navy suit. The cut on his forehead was now covered with a smaller bandage but still visible, a physical reminder of yesterday's events. He nodded respectfully to the board members as he took his seat at the witness table. Commissioner Hayes entered next, followed by the department's legal counsel. The room had filled with officers, administrators, and a select few journalists permitted to observe. At 9 a.m. sharp, the door opened again, and Officer Reed entered with his union representative, a burly man with a permanent scowl named Thompson. "This proceeding will now come to order," announced Chief Harrison, the most senior officer on the board. "We are here to review the conduct of Officer Jason Reed during a traffic stop involving Dr. Marcus Wilson on Monday, March 31, 2025. Reed sat stiffly in his chair, his expression a carefully controlled mask of professional indifference. His uniform was immaculate, every button polished, as if the perfection of his appearance might counterbalance the accusations against him. "Officer Reed," Chief Harrison continued, "you have been advised of your rights in this administrative proceeding. Do you understand that you are required to answer truthfully and that your answers may be used in potential criminal proceedings?" "Yes, sir," Reed replied, his voice steady but tight. "Very well, Captain Miller, please present the evidence collected." Captain Miller approached the projection screen. "Board members, I've compiled video evidence from multiple sources, witness statements, physical evidence, and statistical data regarding Officer Reed's policing pattern." The first video began playing, shot from a coffee shop across the street. The clarity was remarkable, capturing Reed's approach to Marcus's vehicle and the escalating confrontation. Reed shifted uncomfortably as the video clearly contradicted his written statement claiming Marcus had been uncooperative. "As you can see," Captain Miller narrated, "at no point does Dr. Wilson become combative or resistant. Officer Reed escalates the situation without provocation." The second video showed Reed throwing Marcus's phone onto the hood and later stepping on it deliberately. Murmurs rippled through the audience. "Objection," Thompson interjected. "These videos lack context. Officer Reed was responding to perceived threats." "What threat specifically?" asked a female board member. "Can you identify a single threatening movement in this footage?" Thompson fell silent as Captain Miller continued, presenting the statistical analysis of Reed's traffic stops. "Over the past 24 months, Officer Reed has demonstrated a clear pattern of disproportionately stopping minority drivers, particularly those in luxury vehicles." Reed leaned toward Thompson, whispering urgently. The union representative raised his hand. "We request a brief recess to confer." "Denied," Chief Harrison stated firmly. "This hearing will proceed. Dr. Wilson, would you please describe yesterday's events from your perspective?" Marcus stood, his demeanor calm and authoritative. "Thank you, Chief Harrison. I was driving to the police academy for my first day as director when Officer Reed initiated a traffic stop without probable cause." Over the next 20 minutes, Marcus provided a detailed, measured account of the incident. His academic background was evident in his precise language and structured narrative, devoid of emotional coloring yet powerfully compelling. "Officer Reed," he concluded, "demonstrated precisely the pattern of behavior that undermines public trust in law enforcement, the very issue I've been appointed to address through training reform." Reed's face flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous," he blurted out. "You people always play the victim." "Officer Reed," Thompson hissed, attempting to silence his client, but Reed continued, his composure cracking. "Everyone's so quick to believe him because he's got some fancy title. I was doing my job protecting the community from suspicious individuals." "And what," asked Chief Harrison coldly, "made Dr. Wilson suspicious? His Harvard degree, his appointment by the commissioner, or was it something else entirely?" Reed fell silent, realizing his outburst had only damaged his position further. Commissioner Hayes stood. "If I may address the board, I would like to formally introduce Dr. Marcus Wilson, whom most of you have only met through these unfortunate circumstances." Hayes gestured for Marcus to join him. "Dr. Wilson is one of the nation's foremost experts in police training reform. His curriculum on bias recognition and de-escalation has been adopted by 27 police departments nationwide. His appointment as Academy Director represents our commitment to evolving as a department." Reed's expression transformed as the full reality of his situation dawned on him. The man he had harassed and assaulted wasn't just any black professional. He was now effectively in charge of training every officer in the state, including potentially Reed himself. "I'd like to respond to Officer Reed's comments," Marcus said, his voice steady. "This hearing isn't about me playing the victim. It's about upholding the standards this badge represents." He pointed to the shield on Reed's chest. "That symbol demands accountability, not immunity." Thompson leaned over to whisper urgently to Reed, who nodded stiffly. "The board will now deliberate," Chief Harrison announced. "We'll reconvene at 2 p.m. for our decision." As the room cleared, Captain Miller approached Marcus. "That couldn't have gone better if we'd scripted it," she said quietly. His outburst confirmed everything. Marcus nodded soberly. "It's never satisfying to witness someone self-destruct professionally. But accountability is necessary for meaningful change." Outside the conference room, journalists waited eagerly for comments. Marcus declined, stating only, "I trust the process and the board's commitment to upholding departmental standards." The conference room had grown more crowded by 2 p.m. as officers, administrators, and press representatives filed back in. The disciplinary board members took their seats with solemn expressions, their decision evident in their bearing even before Chief Harrison called the room to order. After reviewing all evidence and testimony, Chief Harrison began, "This board has reached a unanimous decision regarding Officer Jason Reed's conduct." Reed sat rigidly at the table, his union representative Thompson beside him, papers cluttered between them from their hurried strategy session during the recess. "Officer Jason Reed," Chief Harrison continued, "you are found to have violated departmental policies regarding appropriate use of force, procedural conduct during traffic stops, truthfulness in reporting, and ethical standards of service." A murmur rippled through the audience as Harrison detailed the specific violations. "Effective immediately, you are suspended without pay pending further investigation into your prior conduct. Your service weapon and badge are to be surrendered before you leave this building." Reed's face flushed with anger. "This is a witch hunt," he protested. "One complaint after 12 years of service." 8 complaints, Captain Miller corrected firmly, 7 of which were inappropriately dismissed by Sergeant Miller, who is also being investigated. Commissioner Hayes stepped forward. "This board also recommends further review of all traffic stops conducted by Officer Reed over the past 3 years, with particular attention to racial disparities and use of force." Reed stood abruptly. "You're all just covering for him because he's your diversity hire," he spat, gesturing toward Marcus. The room fell silent, the outburst hanging in the air like a confession. Thompson pulled at Reed's sleeve, trying to get him to sit down, but the damage was done. "Officer Reed," Chief Harrison said coldly, "you have just demonstrated precisely why this action is necessary. Please surrender your badge and weapon to Captain Miller." As Reed was escorted out, Marcus remained composed, his expression revealing nothing of the complex emotions beneath. This wasn't personal vindication he sought, but systematic change. 1 week later, Marcus stood before the inaugural class of cadets under his directorship. The lecture hall was filled to capacity, with senior officers standing along the walls. Attendance had been made mandatory by Commissioner Hayes. "Today," Marcus began, "we're initiating a new training module on ethical decision-making in law enforcement, and we're going to start with a case study." He activated the projection screen, displaying footage from his encounter with Reed, now a teaching tool. "What you're witnessing isn't just one officer's failure, but a systemic opportunity," Marcus explained. Each moment presented a choice point where different decisions could have led to different outcomes. Over the next hour, Marcus guided the cadets through an analysis of the encounter, identifying the psychological, procedural, and ethical dimensions of each decision Reed had made. "The badge doesn't grant immunity from accountability," Marcus emphasized. "Rather, it demands a higher standard of conduct precisely because of the power it represents." After class, Commissioner Hayes joined Marcus in his office. "The department has settled with the 7 previous complainants against Reed," he reported, "and Sergeant Miller has opted for early retirement rather than face investigation." "And Reed?" Marcus inquired. "Terminated. The union couldn't defend him after his outbursts. He's also facing potential criminal charges for assault and property damage." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "And the academy reforms?" Hayes smiled slightly. "The board unanimously approved your proposed curriculum changes. Bias recognition training begins next month for all officers, not just cadets." That evening, Marcus returned home to find Diane and Zoe waiting. His daughter had flown home from Georgetown after seeing the news. "Dad," Zoe said, embracing him tightly, "I saw your lecture online. They're streaming them for criminal justice programs nationwide now." "It's becoming a case study in police reform," Diane added, handing him the newspaper where his story had made the front page. Marcus sat at the kitchen table, finally allowing himself to feel the weight of the past week. "This was never about one officer," he said quietly. "It was about changing the system," Zoe completed his thought. "That's what your work has always been about." Diane placed a hand on his shoulder. "The department called earlier. The community oversight board you proposed has been approved. They want you to help select the civilian members." Marcus nodded, a sense of purpose renewed. "One incident, properly addressed, can transform an entire institution. This isn't the end of the work, it's barely the beginning." The next morning, as Marcus drove to the academy, he passed the spot where Reed had pulled him over. A small group of community members had gathered there with signs, "Accountability matters," and "Thank you, Dr. Wilson." At a red light, Marcus noticed a patrol car beside him. The young officer inside, one of his cadets, nodded respectfully, not with fear or resentment, but with genuine recognition of shared purpose. As the light turned green, Marcus continued forward, both literally and figuratively, toward a department being reshaped through accountability, education, and the persistent pursuit of justice, not just for himself, but for everyone the badge was meant to protect and serve.